Well, hello there. As promised, I want to share another story on grief. However, I've been advised by one of my viewers that I never introduce myself on my videos, and they want to know what qualifies me to be able to do these videos. She said nobody knows me, and so I need to at least say who I am and, what my credentials are so that people will understand even why I'm doing this or how I'm capable of doing this. And I didn't think that you needed to have qualifications actually to post things, but I think to make statements about certain issues, you want to let people know what your background is. So that's what I'm doing. And so I want you to know that, Marilyn, this video is for you. I guess she has a point, actually. Necessarily, I don't talk about myself. However, as a therapist, the one thing that I can count on is that most people love to talk about themselves. And I'm grateful for that. Otherwise, I'd be out of job. Hello, no business. I have had a session, though, where the entire time I didn't say anything and only the client was speaking. And in some therapeutic circles, they believe that's the way it should be. And maybe so, but I don't agree because I usually have some kind of feedback to give or, an assignment or a suggestion or even just my opinion. And I think that's okay in the therapeutic environment. I really believe that in therapy, what you're doing is you're building a relationship and having a dialogue, a communication. And so, it's hard for me to just not say anything. And for the most part, I will say something. Anyways, so let me say for the record and the benefit of anyone who really needs to know or cares who I am, my name is Debbie, and I've been a therapist in the field of substance abuse and mental health for over 30 years. I've had my own private practice for 10 years. I'm a graduate of Northwestern Oklahoma State University and Oklahoma University. Go Sooners! I have a double master's, one in substance abuse psychology and the other one in addictions counseling. I'm 33 years sober, and that's by the grace of God. That's why I called my YouTube channel Still Small Voice of Recovery, because anything that I've accomplished, I credit to the merciful God who answered my plea on November 3rd, 1993, when I cried out for help. I was living a life that was criminal and unconscionable, and I always say I was a liar, a thief, and a whore. However, God has restored me, and I'm very grateful for that. I believe that all my videos relate to some aspect of recovery, and that my whole life is a testimony to the power of God. My YouTube channel was really just a lark for me, a distraction or a new hobby, let's say. I never anticipated that it would really be much more than what it is, and that's to be a support to others and to help people navigate the trials of life. And if they reach out to me, that's great. And if they don't, well, I'm having fun doing this. I have a lot of interests, and I believe that part of recovery and personal growth always requires doing things that are new and challenging and learning things that improve your mental capacity. And certainly the technology of today is a challenge for most people my age. I'm 76 years old, and I'm still seeking things to do that improve my cognition and challenge me. So I hope I've satisfied my friends' concerns about my personal introduction, because I really want to go on to what I feel is most important, and that is continuing with my series on grief. Throughout my recovery, I have grieved over many losses, not all related to death, but I've also stood in the gap with many of my friends, family, and clients who have experienced grief so deeply that I believe their stories are worthy of telling. So that being said, if you feel that you have a story that you want me to share, then I would be more than happy to do that. Just let me know in the comments or DM me. This story, though, is Leanna's story. I have known Leanna for about 10 years. She is definitely a person that one would say has a huge heart. When God said to her, "Who shall I send?" I think Leanna always responded with, "Send me, Lord." My impression as a therapist, though, is that at some deep level, Leanna has felt a very painful guilt that drives her to take on some of these responsibilities as if it would be some kind of retribution for what she views as a personal wrongdoing. I don't agree with that, but I do believe that the guilt Leanna has experienced has resulted in her feelings of powerlessness over the conditions she couldn't change in her life. And to some extent, these decisions were self-imposed as some kind of punishment. It's irrational, but it happens for many of us feeling responsible for the circumstances or conditions. I find her true nature as someone who sees a need and steps up to the plate to fulfill the need. In another life, she should have been a fireman or a first responder. Anyway, I don't think she's always wanted the role of caretaker, but her unresolved guilt compelled her to reluctantly take on these burdens. And so the grief here in this story lies really in all the caretaking efforts that she has made, all of the things that she has done to caretake others at the expense of her own happiness. As I listened to Leanna tell me about her life, there was a constant thread of death and pain, and yet many of the conditions resulted from her great sense of responsibility to care for others. Her conscience is sharp, and it cuts her because when she takes on a task of caring for people, she sees it through to the end. And although that end completely exhausts her and drains her of her energy, it takes her sense of self. She's trapped by her perception that she can't change. And I want to say at this point that that's consistent in a lot of people. We feel like we can't change, and we fear change, and we don't like change, so we resist change. But change can be good. There's an old expression, nothing changes if nothing changes. And if we're not happy in our current circumstances, then it's time to consider changing. While some might feel the satisfaction and the reward for caring for others, Leanna grieves that in her regard for the care of others, she has sacrificed her own life, but still she forges on. When I met Leanna, she was working in a convalescent hospital, and she was the activities coordinator for disabled people in the sense that they had dementia or Alzheimer's. And most of her clients were suffering from those conditions. But she had a deep love and a deep respect for these people and these patients. Her job was to entertain them and to engage them in activities that would stimulate their cognition. She was dedicated to these folks and was good at what she did. She said she loved her job, with the exception that her supervisor, who was supposed to share the responsibilities, left everything to her. And after a while, it just became too much, and she got burnt out. And so she left that position. However, this fits the fact that Leanna has difficulty setting boundaries, and with others, she avoids confrontation at all costs. And I say this because I believe that a lot of people fail to set boundaries, and then they get angry with themselves because they did things they didn't want to do in the first place. Confrontation is always hard, but if we confront with kindness and we say, this is the way it is, let me help you through this, or let me, tell you something that you might not hear What I use for all the time when I'm going to confront somebody is I usually say, this is going to be an ouch. And if they ask me to explain that, I say, well, this is going to be something you might not want to hear, but you might want to consider. As our friendship developed, she started to disclose to me some childhood trauma that was very disturbing. Her mother was very ill and had been married 3 times by the time that Leanna was still a young girl. Her biological father molested her at 11 until she was 12. And because she was extremely well endowed, she felt that this was what prompted her father to molest her. And somehow it was her fault that he molested her. And this is an irrational belief that a lot of people who have been molested or incested or raped, and I know this from my own personal experience, that seems to be, a thread that happens in people's lives. They believe that. And so we have to reframe those experiences in therapy. In spite of her hatred towards this man, her father, in his later years, she became his caretaker, and she cared for him until he died. And she hated him until he died. Leanna eventually found love, though. She said that she was at church when she got introduced to her soon-to-be husband, Randy. At a church softball game, one of her friends had teased her about his fashion choices because he always had mismatched clothes on. She said he didn't care about that, and he did it on purpose because he thought it was funny. In reviewing Leanna's life, I find it interesting that her husband, Randy, was the only one in her entire life who actually did things for her, who demonstrated how much he cared and loved her. She needed Randy so badly. He was kind and helpful. He was very spiritual, had a great knowledge of the Bible. And with all of the people that she took care of, it was Randy that took care of her. Not in the sense of being a caretaker, not in that role, but as a loving, devoted, and thoughtful husband. I asked her if I could share her story because this year she lost her wonderful husband, Randy. It was a really weird situation, and even though it was almost a year ago, Leanne cannot move past the pain and the loss that she's been feeling. Her grief has been so deep, and I frequently get calls from her, and we have discussions that I hope are beneficial to her. They had just returned from a vacation in West Virginia. Randy had severe diabetes, by the way, but insisted on driving through from West Virginia to Oklahoma, which was an 18-hour drive. She had requested that they stop for the night and tried to convince him to get a hotel or a motel, but he resisted because he just wanted to get home. The next day he was up early and decided to go to Walmart. Leanna says the last thing she remembers was his calling her and asking if there was anything she needed while he was at the store. That day, that morning, just moments later, those last words of the love of her life were what she has to remember. The only person who ever did anything for her had a massive heart attack while in the Walmart store. And the next thing you know, Leanna was being called to the hospital, where upon arrival, he had already passed away. Leanna holds herself responsible for his death. Why couldn't she have forced him to stop that night? Why couldn't she have gone to the store herself and let him sleep and get some rest? She says that she took care of Randy's parents, who lived in their home until they died. And true to form, she states that she took care of her sister until she had to be put into a nursing home. And she cared for her own mother until she passed away as well. Grief comes so uninvited and so unexpected. And the birth of Leanne's first daughter was one of those times. Her sweet baby daughter, Candace, weighed 1 pound and 13 ounces. It was a troubled birth. Forgive me, the name is Candace. Her and Randy were delighted and anticipated that this would be the joy of their lives. But sadly, at 1 month old, their precious girl was diagnosed with necrotizing enterocolitis. It's also known as NEC. Premature babies are at risk for the condition that causes intestinal tissues to die. It can also cause a hole in the intestine, and bacteria can leak through this hole, causing serious abdominal infections. Candace passed away, and Leanne says she held her until she took her last breath. But she was only 1 pound and 13 ounces. Poor baby. She struggled to live. And Leanna struggled to get over this. And now that this is over 30 years later, she still struggles with the grief over the birth and death of Candace. Leanne and Randy had 2 other children following Candace's death. Becky was a healthy child. She grew up to be a beautiful woman. Then, following Becky's birth, her son Riley was born. I say that with great delight because Riley is a hoot. He's wonderful. But let me explain a little bit about that. Her and Randy knew they were going to have a boy and eagerly awaited his arrival, and everything seemed like it was going to be great. And then Riley was 2, and they suspected something was wrong. He wasn't verbal yet. He wasn't talking. So they took him to a specialist, but received no diagnoses. And then the long search began, trying to find out what is wrong with Riley. The first neurologist told them he would never lead a normal life. She said that day that she didn't even remember driving home. It was such a disappointment, such a shock. Leanne struggles with being able to express her feelings and has a worse time struggling to feel her feelings. We're working on that. Riley is now 30 years old and has autism, but he's a high-functioning young man, even though he has the mental condition of a 7-year-old. Following the death of his father, he feels like he's the man of the house now, and he's going to be responsible for the care of his mother. He's so sweet. There is something that Leanna refers to as Rileyisms, because you never know what's going to pop into his amazing mind, and it's usually quite humorous. I recall one time that Leanna was telling me they went shopping, and they were in a mall in one of the bigger stores, one of the bigger outlets, and Riley focused on a mannequin and then decided he was going to be a mannequin too, and he stood next to the mannequin and he was frozen. Leanne sent me pictures of it. It was so funny. It was so cute, and God bless Riley. He's so precious. We're working on expressing feelings right now, and doing this video has forced Leanna to once again confront these disappointments. Yet here we are in the caretaking, continuing mode that Leanna has seemed to be assigned all her life. She assigned it to herself. Anyways, Riley is minimally self-sufficient, but will never be able to live on his own or hold a job. His idea of taking care of his mom is nuking Hot Pockets. But somebody has to nuke Hot Pockets, right? She will be his caretaker until the end, and her greatest worry now is who will take care of Riley as she is approaching her senior years. I thank everyone who is supporting me, by the way, and I encourage anyone who wants to share their story to DM me. My next story is going to be personal, and I'm looking forward to sharing it. There have been many issues of grief in my life, and some of them were devastating and all-consuming and took me years to overcome. But I have found actually that the 12 steps and God of my understanding, which is Jesus, has helped me through that. And God's word, the Bible, rings so true in my mind and my heart. And I encourage anyone who has not come to know Jesus that they take the time to read his word and get the peace that surpasses all understanding. And I say that because I know Leanna as a Christian woman, and I do believe that it's her relationship with God that has helped her to get through. Anyways, God bless everybody and have a fabulous day. And I hope that you are feeling blessed today because you deserve to be blessed. We all do. Bye.